Today's coffee break, we're going to talk about a study that Lisa and I conducted in December 2020 called Rethinking Retirement. We did this with our partners at Response AI, who are an automated data platform, and also want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors of this study. And just one more thing to note, that we do intend this to be a discussion, so please ask questions, comments throughout the coffee break today. So before I dive into some of the results, just want to quickly give some background on the methodology of the survey we conducted. This was a quantitative online survey, and as I mentioned, it was done in early December of last year. We surveyed Americans aged 50 to 69, and this does include both workers and retirees. We did have a minimum household income threshold of $50,000, and we undertook this study really to understand these workers' experiences and attitudes around financial security and retirement planning, really with the COVID lens as an overarching theme. So the first topic I want to take a look at is employment. And I think this, surprises no one as I see your videos and I see not the office environment for the most part, but home offices, or in my case, my kitchen, that the work environment really shifted pretty dramatically from the onset of the pandemic. We had 38% before the pandemic saying they worked in an office environment, and that went down to 21% at the time of the survey. Other side of the same coin, we see working from home or remotely was 9%, and that jumped all the way up to 32% of our respondents. And we wanted to get a handle on how satisfied employees have been with how their employer has handled the pandemic. And in general, we do see really high satisfaction. 73% have been satisfied and 35% very satisfied with how their employer has handled this, unprecedented situation. We see only 10% saying they've been dissatisfied. But we really wanted to get a grasp on what employers have been doing. And right at the top here, we see that first and foremost, health and safety was paramount. 61% said their employer instituted safety measures around the office, protocols, social distancing, how many people can be in the office at once. 53% said their employer allowed for flexible work arrangements. And this one's kind of interesting because this is something that before the pandemic was seen as an employee benefit, but now is something that has kind of come out as a necessity for health and safety reasons. And obviously we saw that on the first slide of how many people were taking advantage of those flexible work arrangements. We also see 48% say their employer developed protocols for those employees that were diagnosed or exposed to the virus. And I want to just jump down and highlight that for better or worse, there really hasn't been a lot of changes to employee benefits during this time. 13% said their employers added new or increased their existing employee benefits. Specifically, 11% said that their employer created or enhanced a caregiver leave policy. This is something I think we just all need to be aware of going forward. With those flexible work arrangements comes some flexible childcare, and it's just something that I think if these work arrangements will be a little bit more permanent, it's something that more employers than 11% will have to think about going forward. Good thing is just 10% said their employers paused or discontinued any of their employee benefits, and even less, 5% said their employer reduced or stopped matching contributions to their retirement plan. And overall job satisfaction is pretty high. 77% said they are satisfied, 38% very satisfied with their job, and just 10% are dissatisfied. But even more importantly, I think this slide shows us how satisfaction has changed since the start of the pandemic. And I think it's really interesting that 53% said, despite all those changes we talked about, their there's been no change in their job satisfaction since the beginning of the pandemic. We do see a pretty equal share saying they're more satisfied now and less satisfied now at about a quarter each. So it's a pretty interesting how differently COVID has impacted this satisfaction level among workers. And one thing I dug into a little bit, someone asked how those now working from home, like what their satisfaction looks like. And actually, we found that those who are now working from home are more likely to be satisfied than those who didn't make that shift. 34% said they're more satisfied. And just as a point of reference to put that 77% satisfaction into context, we see 90% of retirees, we asked them how satisfied they were right before they retired, and 90%. So that's pretty consistent with the 77% we're seeing among our workers. And with that, I'll turn it to Lisa to kind of talk about the retirement impacts.
All right, so just shy of 4 in 10 of our respondents said that the pandemic has permanently shifted what retirement looks like for them. The study did, I'm not going to show the slides, but it did dig into the appeal of certain retirement activities, travel, domestic, international, time with family, and how those priorities had changed, volunteerism as well. And interestingly enough, even though 4 in 10 say things have permanently changed in the way that they view retirement, a lot of those other metrics, the activities, largely did not. Little bit here and there, as you might expect, time with family becoming more important, for example.
Lisa, the respondents here are current retirees?
This is the total. So this is your pre-retirees and your retirees combined. And on the next slide, there's a lot here to unpack. So as much as things may have permanently shifted, 2/3 are still very much looking forward to retirement. Retirees looked forward to retirement before they retired. But there's a lot of interesting things going on with views of work as it relates to retirement. I think most importantly, and we've seen this in other studies, half of our pre-retirees expect to retire gradually. Only a quarter of our retirees actually did. And that goes hand in hand with a lot of interesting beliefs about working, with 6 in 10 saying they want to work as long as they're physically able to. And at 65%, the retirees largely agreed with that. You have just shy of that 55% who believe that health might decline once I stop working. And nearly as many retirees, 47%, agreed with that. Again, half say that they want to work in retirement, but a different type of work. And 4 in 10 of the retirees agreed with that. But there is the 50% there. I plan to retire gradually, slowly, reducing my hours rather than stopping at once. Half of our pre-retirees are saying that. Only a quarter of our retirees said it. And many believing that remaining in the workforce is how to stay happy. 50% of our pre-retirees, but only 34% of the retirees said that the way to stay happy is to stay in the workforce. And then some concern about being bored. 43% of our workers are concerned that they'll be bored once they're no longer working. Only a third of retirees said that. And then financially, I think there's a really important gap, one that we've certainly seen in other studies. Sorry, AnnMarie, if you could stay on that slide. 57% said they were worried about managing their finances in retirement once they're no longer receiving a regular paycheck. So it's definitely a pre-retiree concern. It is not echoed to the same extent by retirees. Only 3 in 10 had that concern. And so I think that's really important that You all have probably heard Matt talk about it as well. Retirees are incredibly resilient. A lot of the things pre-retirees worry about, retirees sort of now view in a more rosy lens and say it's actually okay. And then I think also importantly, we have 54% of our workers who say they're hesitant to retire because they don't know how much money they need. Now, we really wanted to dig in on retirement age with this study. It was a primary focus. And so we asked our pre-retirees here, before the pandemic, at what age were you planning to retire? And our largest share there, 47%, said in their late 60s. And 22% said 70 or older. And then we asked them, how about now? And just some little movement around the edges, but definitely nudging towards a little later, with 29% saying now they think it's going to be 70 or later. And on the next slide, calculated out, we see that 4 in 10 say their plans didn't change. 9% are now planning to retire sooner, and a quarter are now planning to retire later. 15% still unsure, and 8% say they're never retiring. So a lot of people were unimpacted, but I think, you know, both the 9% planning to retire sooner and the 25% planning to retire later pose sort of unique challenges for financial security and retirement and for employers. And then taking that a step further, we looked at how much sooner and how much later. So for those who said they were retiring sooner, it's about 5 years sooner on average that they said they're going to retire. So they're now thinking early 60s, not mid to late 60s. And for those who said retire later, they moved an average of about 4 years. Instead of 64, it might now be closer to 67 or 68. So we did ask on the next slide, why sooner? So among those who said they were going to retire sooner, what are the reasons? And this goes in large part to what AnnMarie was explaining with the job satisfaction numbers. The two go hand in hand. 40% of pre-retirees who want to retire sooner say they no longer want to work. It's not worth it anymore. And a third of them say it's because a change in satisfaction at the workplace. It's because of job satisfaction. It's pushing them out. And then safety concerns, 23% concerned about working with a lot of people. And the ability to telework, which I don't know how you all are feeling a year into this, but I'm a little sick of Zoom. This was back in December. I think people were already starting to feel a little sick of Zoom and Teams and remote. But 21% it said telework is a reason to leave, to get out sooner. And then another 20% said that the nature of their job has changed. And that's a reason why they want to retire sooner. And then down there at the bottom, and I do think it's a low percentage, but an important and common theme that we're seeing in the research. 12% said they're retiring sooner because of the need to care for others in their family. And on the next slide, we asked the—
Lisa, that's one question.
Sure.
Back. Trying to wrap my head around financial impact of the pandemic leading to sooner retirement, and 17% of people saying that. I mean, generally speaking, the pandemic didn't have a lot of positive financial impacts. So that
the market, as we all know, defied the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's entirely possible that there was a cohort of people already with significant accumulation who saw that accumulation rise to a point where they said, okay, it's enough. And maybe combined with some of these other factors, because this was a select all that apply, it's enough. My investments have held steady. It's no longer worth it for me to work. I'm not satisfied anymore. I don't like working from home. I don't want to work around other people. I'm calling it quits. So I think it is possible and not inconsistent with other research we've seen that some people had some positive financial experiences over the past year, even though it was largely marked by unemployment, last March's market decline, and a lot of anxiety.
One other thing too, we did ask what financial actions people were taking, and reducing spending was on the top of the list.
But Paul, I think the next slide is going to be pretty telling, because you can see what happened to those who are planning to retire later, right? So the main driver of those planning to retire later is actually probably something negative happened. They feel like they have to continue working. And there you see the 27% who want to keep working because of the benefit of remote work. And that's compared to the 21% who said it was a reason in. Here. It's a reason to stay. And again, it's the tale of two stories, largely, I would imagine, driven by financial needs. 17% say they're going to retire later because they need to care for others in their family. Whereas another 12% of those sooner said that was the reason. So it's a push-pull in a lot of these cases. So then we said, and we asked, who have you talked to? Where are you getting, how are you making these decisions about retirement age specifically? How are you picking this age? 27% of our workers and half of our and a quarter of our retirees spoke to a financial advisor. Only 5% spoke to HR. And the one I really can't get over is only half spoke to their spouse. Only half of workers, pre-retiree workers in their 50s and 60s, and retirees spoke to their spouse about the age at which they planned on retiring. And 4 in 10 say they spoke to no one. This to me is sort of, it takes you back to basics, right? We're doing tons of research on complex income options and asset retention and projections and tools, and we can't get people to talk to their spouse about when they plan on retiring. So it might be a good starting place. A long time ago, I encountered an organization called Death Over Dinner, and it was how to get families to talk about death and life insurance with one another, because it was a bit of a taboo topic. But this isn't a taboo topic. This is something they're looking forward to, and they're still not talking to each other about it. So I found this really interesting. And, you can see, in fact, on the next slide, admittedly, I'm not sure how they answered this question, because if they haven't talked to their spouse, I don't know how they know when the spouse is going to retire other than guessing. But only about 13% of them think they're going to retire at the same time as their spouse. So there's going to be a disconnect there. There are going to be years of a mix of work income and other retirement sources of income. In fact, it's 4 in 10 who think that their retirement, their spouse's retirement, is going to be at least 3 years apart. And 1 in 10 or more years apart. So it's very interesting that this disconnect exists, but they're not talking about it. So they're really guessing here. And then we did ask about some other helpful tools for choosing a retirement age specifically. And the largest share, 46%, said projections of seeing monthly income would help them figure out the right or the optimal retirement age. 4 in 10 want to talk to an advisor. 4 in 10 said an online tool or calculator to determine the ideal age would be useful. Only 19% said that HR or their employer would prove useful. This is a theme I'm starting to notice in a lot of our research, that there's this really strong desire for a gradual retirement, and no one's talking to HR about it. And whether or not that part-time work, that reduced hours, is going to be available to them. And HR is not part of the conversation. But then again, neither is the spouse. So those were some of the highlights. Those are all of our slides. I'd love to talk about this. Anything you found interesting or questions?
Did you ask at all about non-financial resources? So you saw earlier that a lot of people plan to keep working or reluctant to retire. Exactly the specific slide, but because I'm happier working than I would be if I retired. And so you think in terms of resources that help people actually think about what retirement could look like, and evaluating, if you will, that assumption that there's no way I'd be happier if I retired than if I keep working. You know, really, do you really think that, or how do you know that when, as long as money's not the issue, you can be doing almost anything you want when you're retired. So
Right.
I think that you're just happier working.
Yeah, it's interesting that people usually say that, there are 2 reasons for working in retirement, right? One is financial. They really think they have to. The other is satisfaction, right? They believe they're going to be happier working, and we've seen that when this study, to an extent, in the retirement confidence survey, to a large extent, we've seen the reasons to want to keep working really bifurcated. That but I haven't done sort of research to I don't know what the right word is, debunk this idea that you won't be happy if you're not working. But it's sort of interesting that I don't know what people are basing that off of. And anecdotal stuff, we all know stories, right? My mother-in-law retired in the past year. In fact, she was one of the impetuses for me wanting to do this research. She was a HR professional at a school, and had been talking about retirement for a long time. She's 78 years old, and had been talking about it for a long time. But then the pandemic hit. She felt needed. She didn't like the telework. The social aspects of the job weren't there for her. She didn't like struggling with the technology. And so she finally decided to retire. And she had put it off for so long because she kept saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. I'm going to be bored. I can't sit around the house like Bob does. And now she's been retired for about 8 months, and wondering why she didn't do it sooner. Right. So, some of those stories, right, you get a lot more in richness and qual research. But I don't know that I've seen any studies really tackling that issue of, not being happy if you're not working.
I have done some looks at visualization and how visualizing retirement can help with that, but it still seems it's not that common, both among, consumers who are close to retirement, and even like financial advisors trying to employ that type of talking about it, and not just talking about the money aspect of retirement, but how you're going to spend your time. So it seems like there's a long
true. We have
long
done
way to go.
research with advisors about using visualization as a retirement planning tool or technique, but it's not widely used.
No.
So I think there is some research out there to suggest that when it is used, it's quite productive.
Lisa, this is Al. Couple of comments. First off, I thought it was good to see that there was a low percentage of retirees who weren't satisfied being retired, right? So whatever they're doing, they seem to be happy that way. So for those of us that are pre-retirees, it's good to know that those that are retired are happy. Kind of going to your questions on the HR, right? Not many people are talking to HR. I guess I'll offer up a couple of comments. I think some HR departments have, there's been outsourcing. So I don't think there's the same connection that people have with their HR that they might have had in the past. And I think another thing is, I think there's not as much trust these days with HR. And I'm not saying that for my company. I know this is being recorded. But, as I've talked with some of my friends and their conversations of, HR is there for the company, and the minute that you have that conversation that you're planning to retire, now will you be branded as a short-term employee, right? And what implications does that have? So from my perspective, I wouldn't talk with my HR about retirement until I'm ready to do it. Because, if they say, okay, we're going to retire next week, that's what we want from you, I got to be ready for that. So that may be why you see such a low amount, put HR down.
Showing their hand.
I was surprised on the spouse part, though. That less than half talked to their spouse.
The HR thing is really interesting. I mean, if you think about, we've talked about the baby boomer wave of retirees, and there are numbers, counters even, for how many boomers are retiring. If gradual reduction in hours, a transition to retirement is the expectation, it strikes me that there are potentially some forward-thinking employers who could turn that in to a benefit, to figure out how to help retirees transition as opposed to full stop. I think you're right, though, Al, that there's a concern that that's not there now. So as soon as I hint at it, I better be ready for what follows. But if employers really aren't ready to take on a lot of part-time employees, and it's not appealing to them, that also means that all of these pre-retirees banking on that are going to be in for a rude awakening. So it's really interesting. I'm sensing an employer survey somewhere in my future of asking employers if they're really ready for this and what they might do, because it's pretty strong demand from employees, and I don't know that employers are set up for it.
Yeah, good point.
It also feels like with that 25% who want to push back retirement, that demand's only going up.